More on the situation in Egypt in a moment, but now to a situation here. The conservative summit known as CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, begins in Washington today. There is a growing battle within the Republicans between social conservatives like Governor Huckabee and their belief that the culture wars will cure our economic woes, and those libertarians who say that such solutions are phony and focused on the wrong problems. Joining me now is David Boaz, Executive Vice President of the Cato Institute and author of Libertarianism, a Primer. David, it's a pleasure, and welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Good evening, Judge.
So we had Governor Palin on here, who tends to be a little bit more on the libertarian side of things, not quite where Ron and Rand Paul are, but a little bit more government stay out of my face. We had Governor Huckabee on, who believes that the government should give you permission before you get married. And now we want to talk to you about how the country can solve its problems. Its real problems are a federal government that doesn't recognize the restraints of the Constitution and a public debt that is so staggering and mind-boggling, it's almost inconceivable how the government could pay it back. What direction should the government go in if David Boaz had his way?
Well, I think the government should go in the direction of reducing the size, scope, and power of government. Certainly right now reducing spending, reducing the deficits, and more importantly for a political aspect is that's what the Tea Party, that's what the voters sent Republicans here to do this year. They were upset about government spending, deficits, debt, takeovers of companies, and that's what the Republicans should be focusing on if they want to get reelected. And instead, it seems to me, they're down on Capitol Hill talking about abortion, and they're across town, the conservatives are debating whether gay people are allowed to be in the same hotel. That looks to me like diverting themselves from the focus they promised during the election.
Well, there's no question about that. There's a division in the Republican Party. I mean, there's a division amongst Republicans right in the House of Representatives. Were you surprised? I'm going to guess you were as happy as I was when 26 Republicans in the House voted against extending the Patriot Act, and somebody didn't count noses right, and it wasn't enough votes to pass at that moment under the rule under which they were trying to pass it?
Well, yes, I'm pleased that happened. On the other hand, they did get a large majority to pass this Patriot Act reauthorization. They just needed 2/3 under the rules where they were trying to rush it through. Right. And one of the points to note is they promised that we will read the bills, and then they were given 45 minutes to discuss and debate extending the Patriot Act, and that's why some people voted against it. And I have to say, I am delighted to see 8 of the freshman Republicans voted against this, but that means more than 50 voted for it, and so it's not something to get all that excited about. More of those guys who came here to limit the size and power of government should have looked more critically at the Patriot Act.
I'll tell you who doesn't seem to be interested in limiting the size and power of the government is the Republican leadership of the House. And they would be the minority leadership had it not been for the Tea Party folks getting elected and getting more Republicans than Democrats. I mean, they want to cut the president's budget by $38 billion. That is nothing in the stratosphere of $4 trillion. Senator Rand Paul, on the other hand, wants to cut it by $500 billion. That's still not enough, but that's a very significant cut.
It's a very significant difference, and the measurement of how bad things have gotten in the last few Bush years and the Obama years is that Rand Paul is talking about a $500 billion budget cut, which would be 1/3 of this year's deficit. Spending has gone up by more than $1 trillion in just the last couple of years, and the Republicans are saying, well, we think we can slash $30 billion. That is just ridiculous. They should be looking at what was the budget before everything fell apart in the financial crisis. Can't we get back to that? And then they should say, what was the budget when Bill Clinton left office? And the answer is, it was $2 trillion less than it is now. Are we really getting $2 trillion worth more value out of the federal government?
No, but we're getting a lot more debt that generations as yet unborn will have to pay for. David, it's always a pleasure, and you're always welcome here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Mubarak, the military, the Muslim Brotherhood, do any of them deserve a dime of money in our foreign aid? My freedom fighters weigh in on that one next. Egypt is in a state of disarray. Will and should we continue to borrow money in order to give it away to countries like Egypt in foreign aid? Listen to what the Director of National Intelligence, General Clapper, said today about our growing debt.
It is a great problem for us. That's clear, and I think the debt does pose a potential threat to our national security.
The debt does pose a potential threat to our national security. Here now to discuss my Freedom Fighters Fox Business Network senior correspondent, my colleague and buddy Charlie Gasparino, Occidental College professor Carolyn Heldman, and chairman of America's Future Foundation, Camille Foster. Foreign aid, Charlie, should we just be giving money away, especially when we don't have it ourselves?
It's what, 1% of the budget?
It's a small amount. It's $60 billion more or less to Egypt and Mubarak's 30 years ago.
It does rub me the wrong way that we give away money to countries where leaders don't like us or are not democratic. Egypt is a different situation. They were a friend in the Middle East, believe it or not, as nasty as Mubarak was, a source of stability. That said, it's kind of a cop-out for us to be focusing on this when discretionary spending has been going through the roof. And, it's like we're ignoring the real problem and going after this stuff.
Professor Heldman, isn't foreign aid a bribe? Don't we give this cash to foreign leaders so that they'll honor their commitments to our friends and allies and stay friendly and faithful to our government, no matter what they do to their own people?
Well, indeed, Judge. We should, I think, be using foreign aid for diplomatic purposes. But I have, like you, a big problem supporting dictatorships, which we do throughout the world, who are oppressing their people. And I think it's important to note that the gear that the military is using is paid for by the United States, and hopefully they won't start suppressing protesters with our funding.
Camille, do you think the people in the streets understand that the tanks and the guns that are pointed at them were paid for with American dollars? That would be the American dollars that President Mubarak didn't get into his bank account in Switzerland, if that's true.
No, I'd say they certainly understand that, Judge. And I know that you and I support a Jeffersonian foreign policy, peace and commerce and trade with all, and not entangling alliances. When we are funneling money into these dictatorships, we are necessarily buying and paying for the kind of friends that you would expect to have paid money for.
But why should we grease the skids of a dictator just so that he or she will be friendly to us, even if he's going to suppress us?
Because he's better than the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, I don't know that.
Is there anything morally?
I think it has been proven. Look what's going on in Iran right now. All you need is, do you want what's going on in Iran, in Egypt, on Israel's doorstep? Of course
not. It's very interesting what you say about the Muslim Brotherhood, because today, Carolyn Heldman, the director of national intelligence, said the Muslim Brotherhood is not a terrorist organization. It's a religious organization. It's not a serious threat. The White House is so upset by this, they're going to ask him to change his remarks before the 11 o'clock news comes on tonight.
Well, I think that's a good idea, Judge, since those remarks are obviously very inaccurate. We can debate about whether they have shifted their policy to become more secular or to become less jihadist. But the fact of the matter is that the Brotherhood does have a long history and tradition of pushing Sharia law, and in fact have released documents, documents are available saying that they tone down their rhetoric in order to get into power in order to promote Sharia law once they're there.
Let's concede for the sake of argument the Muslim Brotherhood is no good. Let's acknowledge that somebody could come in after Mubarak who'd be infinitely worse.
Sure.
How immoral is it for a country, the United States of America, 14 trillion in debt, to borrow billions from the Chinese and give it to a dictator just to keep him in our good graces, or to keep worse people from coming into power?
It's completely inappropriate. And not only that, Judge, there are unintended consequences when you throw money around like this. There may have been any number of folks that actually emerged as vital potential partners in supporting democracy and freedom.
You talk about morality.
Supporting
Wait a second. You talk about morality, and you made an economic argument that doesn't stand up. How much more money would we have spent, borrowed from the Chinese, if the Muslim Brotherhood, if radical Islam was in power in Egypt? Tell me how much more.
Would we be spending more?
We would have.
We're about to find out, Charlie.
Excuse me.
We're about to find out.
Right.
We're about to find out.
She's right.
You know what? And you know what? It is scary. And we're going to be spending.
and
We're going to be borrowing more. We're going to be borrowing more. So your economic argument doesn't make sense.
No,
make
it does
the moral
make
case
sense
to me.
It does make sense if you reject the politics of George Bush, which is that we can go around the world and turn dictatorships into democracies.
I don't think he
wouldn't
wants to do
we
that.
leave the Muslim Brotherhood alone, or would we fight them?
I think it's a messy world out there. I think we spend money
is messy, and you
spend money
can't
to prevent
purchase
worst case
political
scenarios. Listen, as bad as the Shah was, look what's in there now. A regime with nuclear weapons pointing at Israel and maybe us. Who knows? But what I'm saying, Judge, make the moral case.
Here's what foreign aid got us today. A president who's a ruthless dictator basically saying, I'm going to get my money from the king of Saudi Arabia. I don't need the Americans anymore, so I'll stay in power and continue to repress my people.
And the alternative is probably 20 times worse.
All right, I want to go to another subject.
Yes, we do. We look at Iran. Look at Iran.
I want to go to another subject for just a minute, because this revolution in Egypt, however it ends up, was largely fueled by social networking. Now, yesterday, the President of the United States says he wants the whole country to be on Wi-Fi, and he wants the federal government to pay for it. Should the federal government pay to put the whole country on Wi-Fi, Carolyn Heldman?
Yes. Indeed, I think that the government is perhaps the only institution that has the resources to do that, and this is a great investment because it's one that is actually going to pay for itself, and it's going to reduce the deficit. How can you be opposed to that,
You know what I'm thinking when Carolyn says that? I'm thinking of the post office and Amtrak when she says the government can do something.
That's exactly what my mind runs to. I mean, we don't have a problem in getting broadband to people who need it. The FCC and the federal government just need to get out of the way.
I'm going to start sounding like a liberal.
Don't worry
like
about
Carolyn.
it. You already
But,
look like bowling, but you didn't wear a tie.
We do invest in schools. You know, there is a public purpose to extending Wi-Fi to everybody. And how much money is it costing?
How good are those schools?
How much money?
Here is my fear.
A lot of them in inner cities are horrible.
I'm going to share. I'm going to share my fear with all of you,
how good is the New York City Police Department?
If the government builds the internet,
right?
The government.
Well, the internet's built already.
If the government extends,
this is about giving access.
If the government has a hand in determining how we communicate,
that's right.
The government can turn it off.
I agree.
Senator Lieberman already proposed legislation that would give the President of the United States the same power over here that Hosni Mubarak has in Egypt, which is to turn the internet off.
So if we do this, so what you're saying,
more ability to regulate
I understand that, but I just want to be clear.
Even the extensive
I want to be clear what you guys are saying.
I'm saying I don't want the government involved.
I want to be clear with what you guys are saying. You're telling me if the government does this, they can turn off the internet. It reminds me of
the gun control
argument.
They might.
It reminds me of the gun control argument.
Hang on, gun control.
Want to buy bazookas, and they say, "Well, that's violating my constitutional right."
Carolyn, should the government be able to turn off the internet whenever it wants? Would you vote for or against Joe Lieberman's bill that would authorize the president to do that?
Well, I would certainly vote against that bill, but Judge, I guess I have more faith in our government that I don't believe that they would ever do what Mubarak did in Egypt.
I
and
will
maybe
send
that's
you a
naive,
copy of my book,
still...
called Lies the Government Told.
Should I be able to go out?
1984?
I got to listen. Should I be able to go out and buy a howitzer right now or a bazooka?
No, let me. The Constitution protects arms, not armaments.
Okay. Should I be going? Should I get a Uzi right now?
That's not a
very. Have to do with Uzi. It's talking about freedom of speech.
It is because it's like, what are we talking about? The government extending access.
Talking about the
I gotta go. Gasparino, you're wild tonight. Camille Foster, it's a pleasure. Carolyn Heldman, thank you for joining us. The plain truth, and I'm going to make Gasparino listen to it on what's next for Egypt. Does the government work for the people, or do the people work for the government? Do all humans have natural rights that come from our humanity, or can any government take away any rights that get in its way? Tonight, freedom in Egypt and freedom in America. The march of history ebbs and flows. It runs toward power and order in government. It races toward liberty and free choices and the individual. We've seen this here with the presidency of George W. Bush, who gave us the Patriot Act, which assaults the Constitution, the Department of Education, which usurps from the states a truly local issue, and illegal wars paid for on a credit card from which we are now going bankrupt. We've enjoyed the exhilaration of the election of Ronald Reagan, who preached that government is not the solution to our problems. Government is our principal problem. We've seen FDR-like central economic planning reconstituted under President Obama and the Democrats in defiance of the lessons of history. And we've witnessed the resurgence of small government Republicans. serious enough about the Constitution to reject an extension to the Patriot Act. We've seen dictators from Tiananmen Square to Tahrir Square crush those exercising their natural right to free speech and assembly. And now we may be seeing one of those tyrants falling through the sheer will and courage of a suffering people who have said to President Mubarak, enough is enough. Jefferson understood that the long march of history is really one continuous conflict between the natural rights of all persons and the avaricious graspings of government. In America today, the federal government wants to regulate everything from the water pressure and the light bulbs in your home to the amount of money that you keep from your earnings. Politicians in both parties pull financial tricks on us, borrow so they can spend today, and our children will pay for it tomorrow, and print cash when they need it, even though they must know that steals the value of the money in our wallets and in our bank accounts. And they pay lip service to the Constitution they have all sworn to uphold, all while resisting the restraints it imposes on them. What should we do? As for Egypt, this relatively bloodless coup can only be liberating. But if the same mentality as President Mubarak assumes power after him, if he ever leaves, those long-suffering folks will just have gone from one tyrant to another. If the demands for freedom of the Egyptian people are even partially met, that is an enormous victory for personal freedom. But that cannot happen while President Mubarak stays in power. As for America, we have the big government party, which is almost all Democrats and almost all Republicans, and that is still assaulting constitutionally guaranteed liberties, still prepared to let the president borrow another $1.5 trillion and give it away, still afraid to grasp the freedom-loving values of small government, sound money, and fidelity to the Constitution. What should we do? We should force a debate on all this. When the leadership of the Republicans in the House tried unsuccessfully to sneak through an extension of the Patriot Act with no committee hearings, no amendments, and just an hour of debate, most members of Congress didn't even know that this dreadful law permits federal agents on their own to get your medical, legal, computer, telephone, banking, and postal records without a warrant from a judge and without you knowing it. When the president asked to borrow another $1.5 trillion, most members of Congress didn't even realize that interest rates are going up. So all that borrowing will raise taxes on future generations, no matter what future politicians choose to do. What should we do? We should openly debate all these issues. We should force our representatives to explain their understanding or lack of understanding of the bills they vote for and to justify the manner in which they vote. And we should let the Egyptian people decide on their own what government they will have. You have heard me say this before. The Republicans run in every election claiming that they will shrink the government, not borrow money, and be faithful to the Constitution. If they reject those values this time around, having promised you that they will uphold them, just like Hosni Mubarak of Egypt, it will be time for them to go. Tomorrow on Freedom Watch, Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann on debt, on the Tea Party, and on the future of Egypt. From New York, defending freedom every night of the week. So long, America.